Lawyers of Reddit, what was the best gotcha moment you ever experienced? I acted for a plumber who ripped up a tile floor to replace a pipe. He installed new tile on top but warned the owners not to walk on it for 48 hours. He emphasized not to let their kids or their dogs walk on it either. They walked on it but alleged the defects were caused by improper install. We had an expert do a report which confirmed that it was consistent with proper installation but people walking on it too soon. Crazy homeowners still went to trial on it. In their evidence disclosure they included a series of pictures. One of the pictures had in the foreground a tile that was tilted upwards. The background very clearly showed a dog's paw pressing down on the other end of the tile. That wasn't so much an I got them situation as they got themselves. Told this story a few years back. But everything old is new again. My brother is a divorce attorney. His most memorable case. He was representing a guy in a divorce custody battle who was accused of horrific child abuse. Very graphic. Very detailed depositions from the young kids against daddy. Things look grim. Then my brother notices the deposition transcript, done by social workers under oath, contains a question at the end from one of the kids. Did I hit my marks? My brother had previously tried to make it as an actor in Hollywood right out of high school. Failing miserably, and decided to go into law. An altogether different form of acting. He wonders how little kids know about acting jargon. Subpoenas the wife's personal checking account during discovery. Sure enough. Acting lessons. Deposes an extremely sketchy acting coach. And panicked coach quickly coughs up DVDs of practice interrogations with the kids. Hours of coaching the kids on exactly what imaginary things to say about daddy. He says it was his one and only Perry Mason moment. In 20 plus years of practice. And dad got sole custody of the kids. Had a client accused of leading the cops on a high-speed chase. The cop on the stand estimated he was going 90 miles per hour. But never actually clocked him. Then the cop identified where the chase started with me. And where it ended. It lasted about 2 miles. Then we went through his log of when it started and when it ended. About 3.5 minutes. Once you walk through the math on that. The average speed of this chase was 35 miles per hour. Client got acquitted really quickly after that. I was suing a landlord who failed to make serious repairs in order to force the tenant out. The hard part is proving bad intent instead of mere idiocy, so you get higher damages. Code enforcement was involved. So I request those records. The landlord left a voicemail to the enforcement department saying to hold off on the fines. They will make the repairs as soon as the tenant is forced out. That was an easy case. Some crap like this happened to my dad. Landlord refused to make repairs. Washer was busted. Garbage disposal was leaking and forced floorboards to warp. My dad moved and wanted his deposit. They wouldn't give it to him. He took them to court. He took pictures before he left and kept all texts from them. They walked themselves into a corner with everything they said. My dad was prepared for every claim. Eventually the judge told my dad he could fight it until the end and get his whole deposit, or the landlord could give most of it now and it would be over. He took the deal because he didn't have the time for court, and the look of anger and defeat on the landlord's face was too satisfying. It's 3 years later and the repairs still haven't been made in the apartment. I was representing mom in a bitter custody fight. Dad wanted full custody and argued mom was an unfit parent. Mom wanted full custody because dad had a history of domestic violence towards her and the kids. Dad's lawyer was doing a good job of painting her in a bad light during his cross-examination. And I was starting to get worried. His lawyer brought a close family friend as a character witness for dad, who said the usual nice things about dad. Then he said something about them owning chickens. I thought that was odd, so I asked more questions. I was able to get the friend to spill the beans that the dad owned chickens for illegal CCK fighting. And he'd take his minor children to these CCK fights. And when the children were acting up, he'd punish them by forcing them to feed the chickens. During which they would get pecked and scratched by the chickens. And obviously, the children were terrified of those chickens. I could see the color draining from dad's lawyer's face. stepmom got full custody. Someone told me this. The lawyer was describing the theft. Double quote. The footprints make it seem as though he didn't go to the basement. And the defendant said. Double quote. Actually we did. This is so petty. I've had much bigger moments. But because of the character of the other side, this will always be my favorite. Doing a boundary dispute. A squabble over what was essentially a few inches of land. OS was a lawyer. And an absolute asshole. He was acting for himself. The whole a lawyer who acts for himself has a fool for a client thing was bang on for him. But he was a deeply unpleasant guy. A bully who thought that he was the smartest guy in the room. Part of his case hinged on wheelie bins and how prior to the boundary having been moved there wasn't space to store a full-size bin beside the house. The fact he now could meant clearly the boundary must have moved. That was the extent of his evidence. It really was thin stuff. During the actual trial he pulled a fast one by suddenly producing an old aerial photo ostensibly to show the boundary at the front of the property had also moved. A fast one because you have to disclose stuff like that in advance. You can't just sit on something relevant and then suddenly whip it out at trial with a flourish. Whilst he was making his submissions that it should be admissible, I looked more closely at it. Away from the bit of the boundary he said it was relevant to and realized that it very clearly showed a wheelie bin in exactly the spot his case said there couldn't be one. Told the judge we were happy for the photo be admitted after all. Got the other side to confirm the date it was taken. Then pointed out he'd just completely fact his case. That photo did him for nearly $50,000 in adverse costs. Couldn't happen to a more deserving chapter. I was deposing a guy in a large breach of contract fraud action. I asked him if he'd ever been convicted of a crime. He said no. Later in the dep I asked him the question again and there was no objection and he answered no. I then whipped out his indictment for felony fraud and his conviction for misdemeanor conspiracy and he denied it was him until I started asking about his co-conspirator, his son, and then he gave me the, oh yeah I remember something about that. My brother is an attorney. He had a case where the guy said he was permanently disabled from a work accident. At a deposition my brother overheard the guy talking about getting his house remodeled. He was already spending the money he thought he was getting. My brother drove by the house to see how much work was being done and saw the guy carrying bundles of roofing shingles up a ladder to the roof. This was before smartphones so he drove to a Best Buy and bought a video camera. Went back and recorded the guy. He had copies made and sent to the other attorney. The guy dropped the suit and was back at work the following Monday. My brother's client didn't want to pay for the video camera. He saved them thousands of dollars. They eventually paid but he still gets a little peeved when he talks about it. The first case I ever did. Opposing counsel misplaced the copy of my client's driver's license. Rather than admitting his mistake and asking me to resend it, he filed a motion to compel, claiming we never sent it. Well, I was able to provide proof that we'd sent it to him like 8 months ago. So the judge was rather displeased with his antics. When I was a prosecutor I had a guy who was representing himself. He was charged with car theft and evading. He was actually able to escape the cops for quite a distance and was captured later. His defense was that he wasn't the person. I got his calls from jail and he talked so much to his girlfriend about how he had committed the crimes. The look on his face when I told him that I was providing him copies of his jail calls was great. Edit. I remember an even funnier thing. I had another guy who was representing himself. It was a residential burglary and one of the elderly neighbors saw the defendant running from the house. At trial, the defendant was cross-examining the witness and he asked, double quote, now when you saw this person running away? And the witness said, double quote, I saw you running away. In a protective order hearing a respondent admitted on cross that he choked his partner. His attorney looked like his head was going to explode. The judge still only granted an order not to abuse. He wouldn't grant the stay away or any other relief we asked for. Go figure. Plaintiff alleged he was so injured in an auto accident that he couldn't work, do any regular activities, or pick up his young kids. He then posted on his public FB profile him doing the ice bucket challenge. If you're not familiar, he basically lifted a huge cooler filled with ice water over his head. His attorney had no idea he had posted it. Once heard about a man who got a doctor to do him a report for his compo claim. Can't bend. Can't lit. Can't run. etc. Problem was, he had a paternity suit ongoing at the same time. Got the same doctor to write a report for that case. No restrictions on mobility. Can pick up the kid. Play with him. etc. As you can guess, he and the doctor got caught. My client's house burned down from an explosion in the fuel oil tank used to heat the house. It was clearly the oil maintenance company's fault. But his homeowner's insurance, from a very reputable company, still refused to pay out, citing a ridiculous technicality in his policy. Essentially, the policy covered damage caused by the oil heater, but they claimed that it was the storage tank that exploded and wasn't part of what was covered. So they deny his claim, which was about $2 million. And then I get involved. During a deposition with the claims adjuster, I ask how she came to the conclusion that the storage tank was not a part, or at least connected to, the heater. She states that she relied on her expert witness, who was an engineer. Little did she know I had already checked this person's background. He had zero engineering experience or education. As most of you might know, you don't get attorney's fees in most cases. However, when an insurance company denies your claim in bad faith, now you do. Her little admission cost the company about $500k in fees, on top of the original claim for $2 million. Obligatory. Not a lawyer, but my grandparents had the longest running divorce settlement in LA history in the 70s. My grandpa refused to pay his alimony. 1 year. He went to Hawaii and sent my grandma a postcard that said something along the lines, but more wittingly, double quote, "I'm enjoying all of your alimony money. Look at what I'm doing with it." He drove it straight to her lawyer, and it was game over for Gramps. Edit 1. The divorce was about 5 years long. It was the longest divorce in their city at the time. I'm sure it isn't anymore. My only full trial. Contractor ripping off my client who was no saint. I went through entire contract where each sub was listed and he agreed to each line as being part of contract. He agreed that amount was to be paid to the subs. He agreed to the total. What he failed to do was list any profit. My last question was, where is your profit in this contract? No answer from him. As written, he was working for free. Case dismissed by judge without me having to present my side. I was trying to get a restraining order for a woman in DV court from her son's father. We are presenting testimony and she details a story where he grabbed her arm and slammed it on the tub, breaking her wrist. On cross, I asked the accused if he ever broke my client's wrist on purpose. His response: "Fuck yeah, I did. She was 9 months pregnant, about to smoke crack and wouldn't stop. I tried to grab her arm to get the pipe and protect my unborn son. Fuck me." She left that detail out in her conversations with me. My client was a woman working at a meat packing plant. Her glove, they would only give her the loose kind because they were cheaper, got caught in the machine and she lost her arm. We sued the owners of the plant for the glove issue. We also sued the machine manufacturer for failing to include the required guard. Then we sued the distributor for being in the chain of the sale but didn't really think they played much of a role. The manufacturer swore they included a hand guard and said the plant owner must have used a grinder to take it off. During a deposition of the guy that owned the distraction company, he shows up with the sale documents he was supposed to have turned over weeks before. Turns out there was a note in small print at the bottom he didn't know about that said the sale was without the hand guard, which is against the law. I pointed it out and we ended up settling that afternoon with the distributor. The woman got all her medical bills paid, got money for a prosthetic and got a bunch of pain and suffering damages. Represented an employer in an FMLA retaliation claim. The plaintiff had quit, claiming a hostile work environment. Then went on and started her own company that more or less competed with my client. In the plaintiff's deposition, the plaintiff went on and on about how sick she was when she went on FMLA leave. and how horribly she was treated by my client. Her new company had a Facebook page. I asked her about it and had printed out several sections from the page, including photos. She admitted she had posted the photos, and Marizo posted them from her phone moments after they were taken. After I had those admissions on the record, I produced pictures of her touring the facility where her new business was located, smiling and walking with her friends. The date of those photos was while she was on FMLA leave from my client. Never posted this before. Ex-wife. Ex, trying to fight ex-husband's new girlfriend. NG. NG is in her car trying to flee while ex is beating on car, blocking escape, and grabbing at door handles to get in. But doors are locked. After ex briefly moved out from the path of the car, NG begins to drive away slowly. Ex, noticing the car starting to leave, dives onto the hood of the car. Full stop. Slides off. Gets run over at slow speed. And breaks bones. Several surgeries later, ex sues NG, alleging negligence in hitting ex with the car. As I'm deposing ex, she claims to have never touched the car before it hit her, never punched or kicked the car, never broke the windshield wipers, never grabbed the door handle to try to open the door, never dove on the hood, just yelling. I asked what NG was doing during this time, and ex describes NG as deer in headlights, staring straight ahead, locked in her car, both hands on the steering wheel. Double quote. How did you know the doors were locked? That one got dismissed pretty quickly. Edit. Videotape deposition 2. Made sure that one was recorded. Lady got into a minor fender bender with a truck in a casino parking lot. She backed out of a spot into him. My guy said she parked and went inside the casino for a few hours. At her deposition, she testified that she was so hurt she went right home and to a hospital. I asked if she was a frequent visitor of casino, and if she had a rewards card. She was happy to tell me she did and she had gold status, and showed me the card. I subpoenaed her rewards card's records, and it showed she was playing slots for hours after the accident. My client was being sued in China. We decided to sue them in US to convince the Chinese judge to dismiss the case so it can be heard in the US. We filed suit, and we got the other side to accept service. During the Chinese court hearing, the opposition wanted to have the Chinese court hear the case, but Chinese lawyers got shut down because they signed for the service in the US, implying that the US court is the proper jurisdiction and venue. Edit. The opposing Chinese lawyers were fired the next day. Not a lawyer but a legal videographer. This gentleman was claiming injuries seeking damages against his employer after a fall at work. He claimed he couldn't raise his right arm above his shoulder because of the fall. First deposition comes along and I am hired by defendant's attorney to videotape deposition of the plaintiff. Anyone know the first thing a court reporter asks you to do in a deposition? Double quote. Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. Plaintiff raises his right arm above his shoulder with ease and no sign of discomfort. Does not occur to him what he has just done. Both attorneys were looking down at their notes when this happened and neither of them caught it. The plaintiff himself didn't catch it. The court reporter looked at him and then looked at me and her eyes went wide with realization at what just happened. 4 hours of deposition proceed wherein the plaintiff is instructed, multiple times, to show his range of motion and proceeds to pretend like he can't raise his arm above shoulder level, which he did at the very beginning of his deposition. Deposition ends. Plaintiff's counsel leaves. I call defense, hiring party, counsel over and show him the first 2 minutes of tape. Counsel excitedly whispers to me. Double quote. Case closed. You just saved us tens of thousands of dollars. I got a $5,000 bonus and plaintiff's case was dismissed with prejudice. Not a lawyer, but involved in fraud investigations. Called a suspect who was allegedly using the money he was being provided as guardian for an incapable individual. I explained the allegation. He stated. Double quote. Yeah. They're correct. I took the lump sum and bought cocaine and booze. Understand it was wrong. Do what you gotta so. I'll sign a statement or come in the office if you need me to. Not really dealing with higher level criminals here. My buddy's divorce lawyer withheld all of the proof of infidelity and other stuff. 1+ year of messages history dumped through some app. Provided to my buddy by the guy who was banging his wife after my buddy found out who he was, until the last part of the negotiations. Then dropped the bomb that they had proof of her doing all of this insane shit, including fabricating a pay story when she got caught cheating. She also got her uncle, a DA, involved with that story. The family was stunned and her parents were in the room when it happened. She was also being represented by her cousin. She was very much a daddy's little girl type, and of course her parents never thought she could be in the wrong. Meanwhile their daughter is a serial cheater, drug addict buying painkillers on Silk Road, habitual liar, and overall horrid person. My buddy walked away from that divorce for basically lawyers' fees and the cost of health insurance for her for 1 year. Not my story but a mentor's. He worked in personal injury and accidents. The accident was between two very expensive cars. His clients being new and the opposing sides being a vintage collectible. The case was only in regards to damages and what each side owed each other. The opposing side tried to claim the paint damage on the front where there was a collision, claiming that the cost of the paint job was no longer made and had to be custom made, mixed, and applied especially, and made a big deal over paint. My mentor had the keen eyesight and pointed out if the paint was damaged, where were the paint chips, as they were missing yet not on the ground or embedded in his client's obviously contrasting car. This was brought up in cross and was met with a dumbfounded look and quiet. This bore a huge hole in the credibility of the opposing counsel and eventually led to the very expensive case going in his favor. I sat in on a criminal trial, and the defense basically had no defense other than there were documents lying around with the name Jack Smith and our client's name is John Smith, so there might have been someone else living in the house hiding the drugs. In the very last minute of closing arguments, the prosecutor stood up and said, "I'm really tired of you spending all week pretending you don't know who Jack is when you know very well. Your trial binders which have been sat on your desk all week say Jack Smith, because that's what he goes by." As a 18-year-old computer store owner, I had a guy sue me because his computer was a lemon. Well, he chose to represent himself, to which the judge said only an idiot would represent himself. Begged the guy to postpone and get a lawyer. No. So the guy rambled for 20 minutes and made himself look like a complete redneck moron who just didn't know how to use computer. So then it was my turn. My lawyer stood up and said some legal phrase to the effect of the plaintiff failed to ask for any damages. Therefore we ask for summary dismissal. Gravel bang. Granted. MR. Plaintiff, I told you that you needed an attorney. I was prosecuting a traffic ticket and ended my opening statement with something similar to, "By the end of the day you'll agree that the officer caught the defendant going 65 in a 50. Apostrophe. Defendant, representing himself, stands up and says, while he may have clocked me going 65 in a 50. Apostrophe. Judge stopped the trial, excused the jury, and was like, "You just confessed, so are we changing your plea to no contest or what?" Apostrophe. Edit. This is Texas, where you have a state constitutional right to a jury trial on literally anything. My grandpa has told me this story at least 100 times, but it's always entertaining. He was jury foreman for a murder trial in a small town in Tennessee. Two guys got in an argument at a bar with the victim. The two guys drove home, got a rifle, came back, and shot the guy in the head. Months later, while on trial, the two guys are getting hammered by evidence and eyewitness testimony. These guys were idiots and left a huge trail of evidence. While the trial is about to wrap up, with them going down for murder, the prosecutor brings in the final nail in the coffin. A surprise witness who happened to be the guy they had supposedly murdered. Those two idiots had shot and killed the wrong person who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time wearing the wrong clothes.